let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen, which is the issue that we face right now, which you just got to on negotiations, which is the Russians, for all their talk about diplomacy and all of that, their number two, Dmitry Medvedev, on the day of the strikes, still calls, Krystal, for complete regime change in Ukraine. And actually
Who knew this guy was such a psycho?
You know, it's actually a fascinating story in its own right, as I alluded to, which is that Medvedev, while he was president, Obama thought that he could deal with him on a better basis. They saw him as more
Didn't Hillary go with the reset button?
Reset button.
Yeah.
What didn't end up saying reset?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. But yeah, Medvedev was seen by the West, by European allies, as somebody you could work with, a lot less conspiratorial than Putin, all of that. Yeah, it turns out he's not only a crony, like he's willing to take power wherever he needs it and be Putin's literal attack dog and sacrifice his entire standing with the West for all time by calling for denazification in Ukraine. So it does show you that even with their backs against the wall, even after the humiliating defeats on the battlefield, the scourge of the eyes of the world, the diminishment of the Russian state, I could go on forever. After all of that, they are still using the same talking points about how you need complete regime change in Ukraine when he was celebrating those missiles, and he's the one calling also for tactical nuclear weapons. And I'm like, and this is, again, which for people who want diplomacy like us, it's like, well, look, you got to have two sides at the table.
Yeah.
And if the other side is going to be completely unhinged and crazy, then the death is on you as much as it is on the other side, which is why it drives me nuts whenever they speak this way.
Yeah, so there's a development this morning I'm curious of your thoughts on. So Sergei Lavrov, who's Russia's foreign minister, said on Tuesday Moscow was open to talks with the West on the Ukraine war, but had yet to receive any serious proposal to negotiate. I'm reading from U.S. News and World Report. In an interview on state TV, Lavrov said Russia was willing to engage with the U.S. or with Turkey on ways to end the war, now in its eighth month. His emphasis on Russia's receptiveness comes after a series of stinging defeats, et cetera, et cetera. Lavrov said officials, including White House National Security spokesman John Kirby, had said the U.S. was open to talks, but Russia had refused. This is a lie, Lavrov said. We have not received any serious offers to make contact. So making some noises like he would be willing to have a Putin-Biden meeting.
Right.
What do you read into that?
I mean, once again, it's
like hard to take him seriously.
Putin and Biden meeting for what purpose? I mean, and also they need to be real, which is that there's no way that's going to happen unless there is any serious ceasefire on their part.
There have to be communications below the presidential level before you would expect to get to that level of meeting. There would have to be some sort of, I think it would be hard for Biden to meet with no conditions whatsoever with Putin at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Two things would happen. Either they would have to stop, or things would have to get a lot worse. Like we'd have to literally be on the brink of a nuclear exchange for that. And even then, I'm still not sure that the political conditions would align. I mean, the issue to Lavrov in particular, like these guys are wily liars. I watched them break many ceasefires in Syria. I'm not going to say it was all on them. There was a lot of complicated stuff, but the point is you can't really take a lot of their word seriously. And so if they're going to continue to parrot this type of language, and also even in terms of their negotiation, at the one hand, they're saying this stuff. On the other, they endorse Elon Musk's proposal as one that they would consider. So it's like, which one? They're the ones also that have to lay things out as well, and they're not giving themselves any room in order to open that table. I just don't think it's possible from the Russian side. But I also want to be clear, I don't think it's really possible from the Ukrainian side either. I mean, go ahead and put this next one up there on the screen. Right now, Zelensky remains resolute in his position. Quote, Ukraine is ready to hold negotiations with Russia only with a new Russian president, effectively calling for total regime change in Moscow on the same hand. And actually, there was a columnist, David Ignatius, who I don't think you should pay attention to him for necessarily his own opinions, but you should for his deep connections with the CIA and the deep state. And he was in Kyiv, and he basically wrote a column, actually very recently, that just came out, and he said, look, the idea of compromise right now is absurd. It is simply not in the cards for us. The consensus is there can be no compromise. And this is from again, I take him seriously because he was just in Kyiv with Zelensky and all of his advisors. And the thinking, maybe it's bluster, maybe it's not. Once again, I have no idea.
Right.
I can only tell you what they say. And here's what he writes. What's clear to me is that there's no middle ground. The resiliency and resolve I heard reminded me of Londoners during the Blitz in World War II. I was asked repeatedly by Zelensky and his advisors why people in the West still even talk about compromise with Putin. So their head is nowhere even close to negotiation.
So you basically have two sides that at least at times publicly stated position is we won't negotiate until we have regime change in the other country.
And that's a recipe for disaster. Here's a direct quote from the head of the Ukrainian National Security Council. It would be extremely difficult to explain to our society why we need to even sit down at the table with these terrorists and negotiate. That's it.
Well, and this is where, I mean, I don't blame them for that view whatsoever. But this is also where the Biden administration's stance has led to the place where you would have this really hard line, totally uncompromising language coming from the Ukrainians where, I don't doubt that they really mean it. Because we have sort of enabled, we've created the reality that exists right now where they really feel like they have a chance at complete victory, where they feel like it's possible that they may even be able to, watch the downfall or the overthrow of Putin's government and his power. And so, we've really sort of enabled these loggerhead conditions in terms of any sort of diplomacy, and that's even without going back to, the short-circuited peace talks that at least by some reporting had some chance in the early days of working out, and we said, no, we're not down for that.
There's no way to know. There's literally no way to know about how this is all going to work out, but I think it's always important, for people who are, fans of diplomacy and want it, for us to also be real about what the conditions being created by the both sides are, where it seems almost impossible, and the road to much more destruction and death just seems all the more likely, unfortunately.
Total defeat for Russia, like even being pushed out of Crimea, et cetera, that really heightens the risk, number one, that Putin would feel his status and power was at existential risk, and dramatically increases the chance that he would resort to something like a tactical nuclear strike in order to hold on to power. So that's why, these kinds of signs and signals are troubling, because ultimately that's the sort of back against the wall, no other option situation you could end up in with catastrophic consequences for everyone, including the Ukrainians.
That's right.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.